So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam. أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين نبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank everyone for joining us today. Today we, at the Lamppost Education Initiative, we are taking the time to spend on an extremely important, very sensitive topic. And the title of today's conversation is LGBTQ, Muslims, and religious freedom. I'm Abdullah bin Hamid Ali. I'm hosting today, I guess you could say, this particular conversation. And we have with us brother Ismail Royer. And I wanted to first his bio, in case some of you are unfamiliar with him. But Ismail Royer serves as the director of the Islam and Religious Freedom Action Team for the Religious Freedom Institute. Since converting to Islam in 1992, he has studied religious sciences with traditional Islamic scholars and spent over a decade working at nonprofit Islamic organizations. His writing has appeared in publications such as the Washington Post, the Journal of Religion and Society, Public Discourse, Detroit Free Press, Jum'ah, Muslim Matters, and the Catholic Thing. So, alhamdulillah, we have with us today a very beloved brother to me, Brother Ismail. Actually, Ron, why don't you remind me of like when we first met? You know, what was that? How did we come to get to know one another?
I think I first met you at the Diyanet Center in Maryland. Yeah, my wife and I and my two sons, I now have 3 sons, but my 2 sons at the time, came and watched you give a talk. But I had been following you and others from Zaytuna and from Lamppost for a long time. It's a real blessing to have gotten to know you, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
I really couldn't have imagined a time when we have this kind of working relationship. I'm really glad and honored.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah, this wonderful. Yeah, I remember that meeting, the encounter, and actually I want to add to your bio that you recently became a part of the board of directors at Lamppost Education Initiative. So we have you in addition to your wife, Sister Noura Gouda has joined Lamppost team, and inshallah we hope to do some very amazing things moving forward. Before I move on to today's topic in relationship to the Supreme Court legislation, and I just wanted to just introduce this by reminding and perhaps alerting some younger people to the history of Muslim, I guess you would say, political involvement in the country. And I guess I'll just really focus on the last 16, 18 years. And I think that, and perhaps you would agree or disagree with some things here, but it seemed to me that over the past 16 years, and especially during the Bush and Obama years, that for Muslims, the most significant threat that we saw to our religion and our religious tradition, our teachings, our morality was from the right. The political right, the conservatives. And that had a lot to do with, in my opinion, the legislation which had been, they were attempting to pass through what they call the anti-Sharia legislation. They were attempting to pass through, trying to delegitimize Islam as an actual religion, trying to ensure that Muslims don't have the same sort of rights to vote or to marry and divorce or conduct many of their affairs in the same way and with the same freedoms that everyone else in society has. But all of a sudden, 2016, Trump is now on the verge of winning. At least that's the realization on apparently on the side of the left. And then there was this shift, all of a sudden an embrace made by the left of Muslims, and we have to understand and remember that this particular embrace wasn't a long a long process. It seemed to be overnight, that, all of a sudden Muslims are acceptable people, and apparently because Muslims could help them win or win the race. At any rate, so now we're faced with the situation where with so many Muslims who've embraced the left, they have also embraced many of the mores, I guess you say, of the left, and the very recent reports coming out about Muslims, supposedly more than 50% of Muslims nationwide more accepting of gay marriage, for instance. So why don't you, I guess you say, run us through this, the case in the Supreme Court right now. What was this sort of its evolution, and how did you come involved in, among other things?
So there have been a series of cases in the past few years dealing with the issue of the LGBT cluster of issues, whether transgenderism or same-sex marriage, and then civil rights claims by people who identify themselves as part of the LGBT movement. So this most recent case is dealing with, it's actually a set of 3 cases the Supreme Court granted certiorari, meaning that they agreed to hear these 3 cases, because the Supreme Court doesn't actually accept all cases that are submitted to it. So it's significant, first of all, that the court even agreed to hear these 3 cases, which means that it is prepared. First of all, it sees them as watershed cases, and it's prepared to issue a ruling that potentially can affect the rights of the people involved. So what we have here is we have 3 cases. 2 of them are dealing with whether or not it is, well, first of all 3 of them are dealing with something called Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Mm-hmm. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act is an incredibly important piece of legislation that was passed after the Civil Rights era in during the Civil Rights era in 1964, and then amended in 1971, and it makes it illegal in employment to discriminate for an employer to discriminate against people based on a number of factors. First of all, race, religion, national origin, and sex. And there may be one more in there that I'm forgetting. So the question here is, so when it comes to this is an incredibly important piece of legislation for Muslims and for many others, because the term religion, discriminating on the basis of religion, means that employers are required to accommodate people's religious practices. They're required to allow you to pray, wear a beard, wear a hijab, and so on, with some very narrow circumstances. Now, these 3 cases are not dealing with the religion aspect. They're dealing with the term sex. So the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VII of this act, makes it illegal for an employer to discriminate on the basis of an employee's sex. Here, when it was passed in 1964, obviously the term sex meant biological sex. So an employer could not say, I'm not going to hire you because you're a woman, or I'm going to pay you less than what my male employees are paying, or I'm not going to give you I'm not going to promote you because you're a woman, and so on. So it made that illegal. Now, with the rise of the gay rights movement and transgenderism and so on, the LGBT movement, there has been a push, very calculated and very, I think, intelligent move on their part to try to have the term sex redefined to mean 2 things. Number one, to mean not biological sex, but to mean gender identity. That is how one feels. So a biological male says, I actually am a female, and then being required to be treated as such. Mm-hmm. And also, question the term sex has also been argued to mean as well sexual orientation. So if someone is identifies himself as a homosexual or gay or lesbian, in order to the push has been to try to get the courts to interpret sex in the Title VII of 1964 Civil Rights Act to prevent discrimination, prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation.
Right.
And
so
gender
that's
identity.
important. I'm sorry.
So,
go ahead. No, go ahead.
Yeah. So now, okay. So as of right now, there is no federal law that makes it illegal for an employer to make employment decisions taking into account someone's sexual orientation or someone's gender identity. There is no explicit law like that. Now, what's really critical, though, is that some courts have agreed with this argument. Some federal courts have agreed and said that, yes, the term sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act does, in fact, cover sexual orientation and gender identity, even though they acknowledge that Congress had no intention of including these two as protected classes in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but with some creative interpretation and some a philosophy of judicial a judicial philosophy that allows sort of expanding the meaning of statutes beyond what the legislature intended. These courts have interpreted this law to make employment discrimination on the basis of gender identity and sexual orientation to be illegal. So as a result, in areas that are covered by the jurisdiction of these courts, for example, the Seventh Circuit, which includes Illinois and others, Wisconsin, or the Second Circuit, which includes New York and New Jersey, that, excuse me, not New Jersey, but includes New York, Connecticut, and so on, that in those areas it is illegal for businesses to discriminate on the basis of this of sexual orientation and gender identity under that rubric of sex. So what these cases are doing here, these three cases, they are employers that have been found to have violated the 1964 Civil Rights Act by discriminating on the basis of gender identity or sexual orientation under that interpretation of sex. And because there's this clash between federal courts, they have asked the Supreme Court to clarify what does sex mean in this statute.
Yeah, this sounds, thanks for that. Very, very good, summary of things. And it sounds similar to what was happening with the gay marriage debate, where there was an attempt to, a successful attempt to redefine what marriage was to begin with. So it's like, okay, well, you redefine marriage. Marriage is not only between a man and a woman. It could be between a man and a woman and women. And then all of a sudden, the court sort of followed suit and eventually reached the Supreme Court and actually rule in favor of gay marriage. And so similar tactic apparently is being utilized, at least from my vantage point, is to say, okay, well, sex is malleable, it's not immutable. That if I identify as a woman, then I'm a woman, and you have to accept that. If I identify as a man, a woman, as man, you have to accept that. And so, or also with regard to homosexuality, then it sort of leaves room open for the possibility that eventually the Supreme Court actually may rule in favor of this. And of course, that would have a major impact on religiously oriented businesses and institutions, and that, at least from my understanding, and that it would, because one of the cases in this case, this one was one of those three cases related to a funeral home, right? And it was a case where the funeral home was a religious institution, and they had a certain dress code for men and women. Women were required to wear dresses, women were required to wear pants, and on one particular day, a male employee had decided that he was going to transition to a female, and then told the employer that on Monday, for instance, I'm going to come in, I'm going to be wearing a dress. And so an employer told him that, well, no, you just don't come into work, because he believed that it was going to cause an undue burden to the his clients and people who will come there. The people already traumatized by the loss of a loved one, and then they have to do with looking at a funeral home director who actually is a man dressed in a woman's clothing, right? You know, so fundamentally you couldn't discriminate there, and it actually might lead to in Muslim institutions where, let's say that one of the non-Muslim employees in the Muslim institution decides, or a Muslim employee decides one day, you know what, I'm going to start identifying as a gay person, right? But these institutions have a code of ethics and say that, hey, well, you know, like for instance, where I work is Zaytuna has a code of ethics that doesn't allow for people to become involved with drinking wine and sleeping around and things like that. So if we define people who are involved with those type of activities, they can be fired, you see. But because of this type of legislation, it could threaten all of our Muslim institutions, which really begs the question of who actually is the greater threat. Is it really from the right or from the left, you see? And I think that that's one of the things we're constantly going back and forth about. And for many Muslims, they seem to think that we're really threatened from the right. And even if you hold up, you know, anti-Sharia legislation, which is supposedly been, well, I'm not supposedly, but apparently was been promoted by about 3% of the GOP, that how much of the Sharia do these Muslims actually care about? You know, what do they really care about? You know, in terms of Sharia to even begin with. So why would they be a threat? Why did GOP be a threat if you don't care about the Sharia to even start with?
Well, what I can say about the anti-Sharia legislation is it really is more of a sort of because of the fact that, first of all, U.S. courts don't apply Sharia anyway and cannot apply Sharia anyway, that for the most part, it really was more of an expression of sense of hostility to Muslims more than an actual practical result. I mean, I don't know of anyone in any jurisdiction that was where this was passed that actually had any practical impact on them whatsoever. I mean, it certainly is a nasty. It's a nasty kind of expression of this paranoia that Muslims are trying to take over the United States.
Yeah. And that's just interesting in that. Okay, well, they're mean to us, but those on the left, they're nice to us, and but you know, and they're more accepting. Actually, in October, you were at the Supreme Court building, and you actually were there to offer a speech, and I wanted to play this. I'm gonna put my laptop close to the screen. Hopefully, people can see this. You know, and I just want people to see the sort of this is what tolerance supposedly looks like.
So we filed a brief in this case to support the right of a faith-based Christian family to run its business as it wished. And we have to, as Americans, find a way to find some middle ground where we respect one another. So your right needs to be respected, but you should also respect the right of those who choose to run their businesses in the way that they see fit. And that's the American way. This is not the American way. The American way is to allow people to speak. And I think it's very obvious here which is the right side. It's very obvious here which side is respecting people's rights. And you have the right to say that, and I have the right to say that. What I'm saying, and the families that run their businesses according to their religions, and churches, and mosques, and synagogues all have the right to run their organizations in the way that they wish to run them. And so I ask God to bring healing to this country and to stop the division. And I ask God to bring healing spiritually.
Pretty amazing. I mean, like, it's attempts to drown out everything that you have to say. You're not allowed to disagree. You're painted as a bigot. They turning up music, person in your face, and it's. I mean, you know, how do you feel? Like, you know, can you sort of, you know, talk to us about that experience?
Well, what I kind of did was just sort of, it was almost surreal, you know, like I was looking at it in an out of body experience, you know. So it was so bizarre. It's like, well, let me just, and I was actually focusing on this woman and just speaking directly to her, you
MashaAllah.
know, right in my face. And the other thing is that like the whole crowd just parted, and because she was coming in there saying, "I've been assaulted. They're stepping on my toes." So she, anyway, so everyone got scared and ran away and left her just screaming in my face.
Mm,
Um, and afterwards, actually, I got down, and because there was another speaker after me. I got down and I went and tried to talk to her in the audience, and
mm,
people were shouting at her, "Don't engage with him! Don't engage!" And that's the problem. Don't
yeah,
engage.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
alhamdulillah, I mean, I was really impressed with your composure. You know, I believe you act very prophetically in that particular day, and it was very clear. You know, it was haq. You know, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was with you that day, I believe. You know, and you know, hopefully, it will remain with all of us. But this is an extremely important issue, especially with regard to our children and our future. And I think that the
Yeah.
Muslim community have to be they have to take it more seriously. I think that I get the impression at times that we really don't take it that seriously, that serious, and it's like when you start to see these new statistics come out claiming, you know, and I'm not totally sure if I believe the claims about like how many Muslims actually are accepting of gay marriage, meaning that they've
Yeah.
internalized it, consider it to be halal. But I do think that a lot of times, like in this case, that with people attempting to bully you, that often that Muslims answer questions, you know, they're feeling bullied, and so they have to give the right answer, you know, because people will say, well, yeah, morally Islam doesn't allow it, but you know, I support people's civil rights, right? You know, so a person simply saying, a Muslim saying that, okay, I support gay marriage or I support their civil rights to marry whoever they want to or to be whoever they want to, it's not necessarily saying to me that most Muslims or more than 50% of Muslims actually accept that that homosexual acts are actually lawful, you know, and it's that hasn't been my experience, you know, that when I mix with the Muslims in the masajid in particular, you know, I don't get the sense that Muslims are really just gone that far. But I do think that a lot of Muslims, they are intimidated, they're bullied, and so, and then we're given these statistics and misled and manipulated by such things, you see, in my opinion.
Yeah, I remember in 2000 or so, I asked my you know, supervisor at CARE when I used to work at CARE, and I said, you know, I think we should do. What do you think about doing something about this gay marriage thing that is being pushed? And he said at the time, and you know, this is not a crazy thing to say. I mean, it's understandable in a certain way. You know, he said, well, you know, strategically, we don't want to do that because we don't want to alienate allies. And I think that what happened back then was that we allowed these things to slide because, first of all, we didn't really see the tide that was coming. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
was a massive tide
Right.
just rolled
Right.
in. You know, and the other thing is the fact that we, you know, Muslims have the sense of being have the sense of being under siege, and this is and especially now after you know, post 9/11,
Mm-hmm.
being under siege, and so why would we want to alienate allies? And so there's that. Now, that sort of sense of not wanting to alienate allies is one way of one attitude that you find among Muslims. Now, another attitude that you find among Muslims is that, well, hey, why do we care what non-Muslims do? Why do we care about the, you know, broader society? I personally am against, you know, I personally believe that Islam doesn't allow homosexual acts, or Islam does not permit people change, you know, or even recognize that a man can change into a woman and so on. But what difference does it make to me in the broader society if that's what goes on? And then the third possible way of looking at this is that, well, who cares? I mean, who am I to judge that that's wrong or right? Islam doesn't necessarily. Maybe Islam actually allows it because there was some, you know, there's this argument that like because
The
certain
Zoroastrians.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Zoroastrians, or another thing you hear sometimes is that, well, in Muslim certain Muslim cultures, they allowed it and continue to allow it, and so therefore it's okay in Islam, which doesn't make any sense. So I'm not even about that third option because that's
because what about what the Quran says? What about at the end of the day? Because you can find any opinion naturally, but that'll permit something. But if the Quran is clear on these issues, and who really cares what you have to say?
Right, but let's take the other two issues, which are less crazy. The first of all, the issue of why do we care about what happens in the broader society and so on? Well, I would propose that there are two reasons why we should care. Number one, because it is our obligation as Muslims to command the right and the evil. So
and to call to good in general.
Right. So, for example, if there's some national discussion on whether or not gambling should be permitted or not, we know in the Quran that there's more harm than good, more sin than good in gambling, and so that's not just for Muslims. It's not just that Muslims aren't allowed to gamble. It's that this is a trick of the shaitan to cause discord. We don't want to see discord among Muslims. We also don't want to see discord in the broader society. We want good for everyone. So we can go out and we can advocate that gambling not be more broadly permitted in the society, or pornography and these kind of things. And what many Muslims don't realize is that, yes, we have a separation between church and state in America. Yes, it's true that you can't have a law that says gambling is forbidden because it says so in the Bible. The law can't say that. But there's nothing wrong at all, and moreover, it's actually expected. It was expected by the people who wrote the Constitution that people would, for religious reasons, motivated by their faith, go and make public policy arguments. The thing is, you have to. The law has to have some basis in something other than revelation. But there, because our revelation we know is good for humanity, we can find many reasons why there would be benefit for people. And obviously we're not going out there trying to get pork to be illegal or something like that. Those are things that are ta'abudiyya, those are things that are forbidden for us because of Allah's wisdom, and we don't know what that is, and they have to do with ibadah. But there are things that are forbidden for the reason.
Yeah, but we can tell people, we can discourage them from eating pork. I mean, still, we can still do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But we're not going to get involved in some kind of legislation. But when it comes to something like gambling, pornography, and these sort of sexual deviations and so on, then we have an obligation to say what's right and what's true, because we care about the goodness of people. Now, the other thing is, because it is absolutely delusional to think that we can live in a society where this sort of where evil is seen as good and harm is seen as beneficial, and that's not going to enter our homes, and that's not going to affect us. So they'll come and they'll start forcibly introducing curricula in your schools, which have begun to. So on. So we cannot be silent on these when we see waves of change for the worse and coming across the country, and think that we are going to be isolated.
And I think that's the most important point right here that you mentioned at the end about like forcing being compelled to accept certain things. And so you can say, okay, well, it's not my business. People can go do whatever they want to do. I say, yeah, sure, they can. But once they come to me and they start to tell me that, listen, that you're required to teach your children this, that you're required to accept this, and if you don't, you're going to be blacklisted, or you're going to be fired, you're going to lose your job, you're going to be shut down. And so it's like, and it's really interesting. It's like on one hand they're arguing that, okay, well, discrimination from employment for them, but then all of a sudden they're willing to threaten your employment because you refuse to accept their ideology. But they have all this power, and I've said it multiple times before that the LGBTQ quote unquote community is not an oppressed community. They're not oppressed. They're oppressive, an oppressive community. So there's a big difference, between what we're saying, what we're suggesting, and what they are actually expecting of us. Because we're just saying, listen, we acknowledge that you can do whatever you want to do. But you invaded our territory now. Now you're telling me that as a Muslim, I can't believe what Islam demands for me to believe, right? That I can't practice what my religion demands for me to practice, you know? So when we start talking about religious freedom and the threat, it's like, well, what serious threat? I mean, this is a serious threat to Muslims and to Islam, you know, moving forward, you know? So, yeah, I think the Muslims are really missing the mark on this big time.
And the only reason that this issue is not more obvious to Muslims right now is because the left has made a strategic choice not to go after Muslims,
right?
Not to go after, and sometimes you see the lid come off of that a little bit. For example, when Beto O'Rourke recently in the Democratic
the debate,
said, right, in the debates, he said that churches, religious institutions that refuse to hire people who are LGBT should lose their tax-exempt status.
No, it was more than that. I thought he said a little bit more than that. I think he said, you know, who refuse to accept, you know, not just like to hire them, refuse to accept LGBTQ.
Yeah, exactly. And then someone later said, asked him, does that include mosques? And he said yes. You know, but see, he only said that after he was forced into saying that. And for the most part, they're not going. They're specifically choosing the LGBT and the broader left and progressive strategic. This is not a conspiracy theory. It's just that there are strategic advance certain agendas. I mean, everyone has it. Even the agricultural industry or the pharmacological industry, or everyone has agendas to advance certain things in the culture and legislation. The court. Yeah, so part of their strategy is that they do not alienate Muslims, so they're leaving them alone. They're going after Christians. But what Muslims don't realize is that when someone comes to your Islamic funeral home, for example, in Springfield, Virginia, here, the Masjid Mustafa, they're raising millions, over $1 million to start a Muslim funeral home. Okay, so what happens when someone comes and says, "I'm a transgender, I'm a woman, but I'm biologically a man, and I want to work here," and they say no, and you know they go to court, and the whole thing is shut down. You know, the community came. And you know, poor people came and gave $1 out of their pocket every Jumu'ah and so on and so on. And you raise this thing, and now this whole thing is going to be shut down because you don't want to hire someone who's going to be violating your religion. This is not respect from their part. This is bullying, and this is oppression from their part.
You know what's interesting too about this is that what a lot of Muslims fail to understand is that there is no united front realistically among the LGBTQ community, in the sense, like, we call them a community, but they're very splintered. It's like تحسبهم جميعا وقلوبهم شتى, as sort of Hashra says, you know, about Bani Israel, that they, you know, that you think that they're united, but their hearts are divided. You know, and so I don't know, are you familiar with Douglas Murray?
I'm not a huge fan because of his bell curve.
You know, but it's real interesting. Yeah, I'm not a fan of his either. But I said, it's interesting that he highlights, like, what in his book. He has this book called the Madness of Crowds that I've been reading, and I know he has some negative views about Islam. You know, but what you would expect, your gay person naturally is going to have some negative views about Islam, among other things. But he seems to say that the fundamental, the cause of, like, many of the problems we're having today has to do with the Q in the LGBTQ, and that the queer group, which tries to represent all the others, that they're the ones who have been most vociferous in their emphasis on the identity aspect of LGBTQ, of gayness and transgenderism and other things. You know, I wanted to read a passage from his book, which I think was an important passage for people to hear. It's about 3 paragraphs, you know, but he said it's in a section called Gays versus Queers. He says that for even gay men and gay women have almost nothing in common. It may be too pedestrian to even mention, but gay men and lesbians do not always form the warmest of relationships. Gay men often characterize lesbians as dowdy and boring. Lesbians often characterize gay men as silly and displaying a failure to grow. Neither have very much use for each other, and almost none meet in any communal spaces. There are places where gay men can hook up and places where gay women can hook up, but there have hardly been any places in the decades since gay liberation where gay men and women organize or assemble to be neither each other on anything like a regular basis. And a couple more paragraphs. So that gay men and gay women, meanwhile, have a famous amount of suspicion towards people who claim to be bisexual. The B in LGBT is a source of occasional angst within the gay media. But bisexuals continue to be viewed not so much a part of the same community as gays as some kind of betrayal from within its midst. Gay men tend to believe that men who claim to be bi are in fact gays in some form of denial. Bi now, gay later. And while a woman who sometimes sleeps with women will often get a hearing from male heterosexuals, few women react positively as partners to men who also sleep with other men. The question of what any of these people, gays, lesbians, or bisexuals, have to do with people who decide to try to swap genders is a question for another chapter. But it is worth bearing this internal frictions. It is worth bearing these internal frictions and contradictions in mind when people talk about the LGBT community or try to co-opt it for any political purpose. It barely exists even within each letter of its constituent parts. So fundamentally, it just was challenging this sort of unified view of this group of people, you see. And I think Muslims make that mistake as well. And I think that it helps to deepen our commitment to the community, but thinking that they're unified and they're all on the same page, but they're Republican gays or they're Democrat gays. You have everything. So.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that on this point, the transgender issue is actually an order of magnitude more significant in terms of its potential impact to Muslims than, so if you look at than the gay issue, because if you look at this, for example, this trio of cases, two of them are related to whether or not the term sex should include homosexual. But the transgender issue is very significant because what this would mean is that not only would Muslim or religious organizations, and for that matter, non-religious organizations, have to hire people who are men presenting as women and women presenting as men, but also they would have to accommodate them through bathrooms, bathroom access, for example. So it's one thing if your business, for example, has a single bathroom or two single stall bathrooms, then it really doesn't it doesn't cause too much inconvenience to just say, all right, well, these bathrooms are for anyone who wants to use them. But if you have multi-stall bathrooms, then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to allow men to be in women's bathrooms, and this violates. Not only does that violate the religious obligations of women, Muslim women and Jewish women, for that matter, to cover or to not be sitting in a toilet right next to a man who's potentially observing them and so on. But also, it's going to require a lot of modifications by the business owner and so on and so on. And so this actually affects not only Muslim businesses and Muslim organizations, but this affects Muslim women wherever they go. So let's say they go to a gym, and the gym is it has a women's locker room, and now they're going to have to require men to be in the women's locker room, and this actually became a very significant issue in the oral argument when the Supreme Court was hearing argument on these cases, and the justices really drilled down on this. And what's really interesting is that, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who many people would assume is going to go along with the employees who are suing the employers in this case. Actually, she's not a third wave feminist. She's a second wave feminist. She's a feminist who believes that women are women, and that it's actually and it's actually contrary to feminism to consider biological men to be women. Now, she didn't say all of that in her oral argument, but her skepticism of the position that men can actually be women and so on is really really came out. So I think that it's just a bridge too far
Yes.
to ask society, not only religious people but also just just anyone. It's a bridge too far, just like we saw with the recent waxing case out of Canada.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, this is a man who went around targeting immigrant run waxing spas or whatever, and asking demanding that they wax his genitals.
Yes, right.
They didn't want to do it.
Right.
They didn't want to do it. And he lost. He lost big time in Canada, of all places. He lost in Canada. And the ruling by the tribunal there was just like incredulous. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. There have been multiple cases like this. I mean, of course, probably the most prominent, the first one that rose to prominence was the case of the gay birthday cake issue, which in the mainstream and amongst Muslim circles largely as well, the narrative is that this gay couple comes into the bakery and they ask the guy to make a cake for them, and he refuses them service because they were gay, which is totally false. That's not what happened, as we know. But Muslims, that's the narrative that they have, and they continue to present it. So it's like, well, what happened was that the guy said, listen, I'll make you a cake, but I'm just not going to make a cake that says, congratulations, John and Harry. I'm not going to do, or put, a statue of two men on the cake. So, but I'll make any cake for you. You can do all that yourself if you like, but I'm going to make you a cake. So.
Right. Or the recent case of Arlene's Flowers, which is out of Washington State, which I also helped file a brief in as well. So this is a case where a woman had some gay customer, and she has had this customer for many years and had no problem giving selling flowers to this customer. Well, the customer comes in one day and says, I'd like you to provide flowers for my gay wedding. And the owner said, I'm sorry, I can't do that, because of my religious beliefs. It would have required her not only to sell her flowers, but also to set the flowers up and essentially participate in the wedding. And you just refused. And so the Washington State Supreme Court found her guilty of violating the state anti-discrimination law. And now that's before the Supreme Court also.
Yeah, and then multiple cases. This case, the hysterectomy request from the Catholic hospital. There's right. Yeah, the woman. She was a biological woman. She's transgender identified, and goes to the hospital and wants to have her ovaries removed. Healthy ovaries in the hospital, because they had a special policy, religious policy, they refused to remove healthy ovaries from the woman, and so she took it to court, and it's all intentional. It's all like planned, and you can really just tell that. And then there's another case in Texas right now with the father who is having a battle with his wife. They were divorced. I think his son was 3 years old, and then now the son is 7 years old. When they got divorced, he was 3, and so the mother started to teach the little boy that fundamentally that he was a girl, and so now they're trying to obligate the father to sort of yield to the decision to have the boy be given hormonal therapy, or they call it therapy, which is not, but totally pretty much sterilize the boy and do things so they can transition into a girl, at 7 years old. Yeah. So multiple cases like this.
And in the same way that Muslims are obligated by their religion to care about, for example, children separated from their parents, on the border and so on, we are also obligated. How can we just stand by and watch this sort of harm being inflicted on young people and not do anything about it? How can we allow this to spread, this madness? And it's really just sort of an unraveling of decency and reality, the concept of reality itself. How can we allow that just to unravel and sit back and say, oh well, how does that affect us? I mean, it affects us.
Yeah. And I think that there was a time. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were trying to make a point. Go ahead.
I'm going to say that the brief that we filed and that you signed on to as well, and Sheikh Hamid Khalwadia and the brother Mubin Vaid helped us on, and others helped in that. This brief is actually, and this was your wording, by the way. This was your wording that was very good. That was we said we had that the law has to be based on reality. You know, I mean, this is essentially a rebellion against reality itself to say that a man is a woman. You know, it's so
yes, right.
we uncomfortable as it might be. You know, we have to take a stand, and we have to say, this is our position on this. Now, the left, we will work with you on all kinds of things. We'll work with you on criminal justice reform. We'll work with you on the environment if it makes sense. We'll work with you on animal rights if it makes sense. But and poverty and so on. But we're not going to accept all beliefs. We have our own integrity. We have our own principles.
Yes, right.
And we will those who on those issues where our principles align, and we will respectfully oppose or at least sit out when those when our principles don't align.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it seems to me, and what I wanted to make earlier, which is similar to what you were already saying, is that, you know, there was a time when, of course, when the whole gay marriage debate started, that it seemed easier to just simply say, you know, I'm just going to sit out on this one. There's no need to be concerned. All they're talking about is about getting married. And a number of Catholic organizations were opposed to the passage of the new legislation and its approval by the Supreme Court. And they would argue that, they said, well, if you start here, it's going to have a snowball effect, and then next they're going to start trying to indoctrinate your children into these things and into the educational realm. And they were saying, no, we're not even talking about that. We're only talking about marriage. They said that's the only thing we're concerned about. But now we see that it's been actually, it's devolved into what it is right now. It's exactly as people have suspected. And the same thing has been said now with regard to this particular brief by some of those individuals, the opponents of it, who would say that, okay, no, we're only talking about employment. That's all we're concerned about. We're not talking about, you know, sports and locker rooms and that. We're just talking about employment right now. You see, but you know, you're going to boil over or sort of spill over into all those other areas as well.
Right. Particularly because the term sex in Title VII of 1964 Civil Rights Act, courts actually, when they're interpreting Title IX, which deals with sports, look to the interpretation of sex to understand what is meant by the term sex in Title IX. So when the court makes a ruling on what sex means in Title VII, it's going to affect sports by its very nature. It's going to affect how how sports is dealt with. So the other thing I was going to say was, you mentioned certain Muslims who are actually supporting the employees in this case that are supporting the concept that the term sex should cover gender identity and sexual orientation. Now, the people who are promoting this are a group of mainly professional associations, Muslim professional associations, lawyers, some civil rights groups like Muslim Political Affairs Committee, IMPAC, Muslim Africa. IMPAC is normally pretty good. More or less. I like them generally. That's a qualified like. Not everyone does everything. We don't like everything everyone does, but But yeah, you have Muslim Advocates. Muslim Advocates is a very, very aggressive supporter of LGBT ideology, and also like Muslims for Progressive Values, the one that has gotten some controversy for criticizing Ilhan Omar, and others. What these groups are doing, they're making an argument that is really resonating with Muslims' fear of being unaccepted, of being disliked, and just fear of sort of like being attacked, which is an understandable fear, but it's resonating. And what they're saying is that if employers are allowed to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity, then they will also be able to discriminate on the basis of someone being Muslim. The fact, though, is wrong, because Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act specifically makes it illegal to discriminate on the basis of religion. So there's no benefit. There's absolutely no benefit whatsoever. The idea that somehow or another we need to defend LGBT, what is being identified as LGBT rights, because that somehow is going to spill over into defending Muslim rights, and somehow is actually false.
Right.
And another thing I noticed is that what these groups are not realizing is that even if they're worse, I'll give you an example of where what they're saying might actually be correct. So, for example, I, as a Muslim, I go to a carpenter and I say, I would like you to put a roof on my mosque. And he says, well, I apologize, but I'm a Christian, and I believe that putting a roof on your mosque is going to be, be sinful to me, because I'll be, and so it's possible that someone like that, if there were a ruling in favor of people saying, well, my religion won't allow me to or someone who's homosexual, whatever, that could or to serve serve a cake to make a cake for someone who's homosexual for a gay wedding, that this same argument could be used in this situation. But what I would say there is that as Muslims, we have to say, oh, you know what, I understand your predicament.
That's right. That's right.
I understand your predicament, because if I were a Muslim roofer, I wouldn't want to. I might have an objection to being to putting a roof on your church. And even if I personally, for example, even if I personally could somehow in my mind not feel that I'm committing a sin by putting a roof on your church, I should at the very least understand the Muslim who would feel that.
That's right. That's right.
So, and this is just how we live in a diverse society where we respect one another. We just have to understand. Look, we as Muslims, because we supposedly have this taqwa and this fear of Allah, and fear of sinning against Him, and fear of the hereafter, and because for that reason we don't want to be put in difficult positions. I don't want to be put into a position where I'm forced to choose between sinning against my Lord and losing my business. I don't want to be put into that position. Therefore, I will not want to put other people into that position. That's right.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This is part of wanting for others what you want for yourself.
One for ourselves. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, that was excellent. That was just beautiful. Beautifully stated. And actually, I mean, before I actually want to, wind down, because I've actually held you for much longer than I originally planned to today. I had family, and I apologize for keeping you so long. And we should have worked out the kinks early today. But one last point, I guess I would say, and then I'll allow for you to offer some closing comments, is that it seems to me, when we talk about the issue of Islamophobia, that the fear that Muslims have of the right, which they call Islamophobia, seems to be the fear of physical harm more than anything else. So in that sense, it's like, it's really more like Muslim phobia, where Muslim becomes like a racial term or a cultural term. I'm afraid of being hurt physically by somebody from the right. And I'm not saying that that's not a legitimate fear. On the other hand, Islamophobia, if you take it as it is, which really means the fear or the irrational fear of Islam as a religion, say religious teachings, we have to really ask ourselves and honestly answer the question of, like, who truly has expressed and shown anxiety and true fear of the religion itself and the religious teachings itself, the moral teachings itself, right? See, and you find that more so on the left. That's really where you find this more. And this type of legislation not only affects Muslims, but it affects people of all religious persuasions, and that is the reason why there has to be a united front against the attempts to invade into our spaces and to try to compel us to believe certain things. When we start talking about fascism, they say, they hit these fascists on the right. So I don't see any fascism on the right. I see the fascism on the left, because they're the ones who are trying to compel us to believe this and to do this. And if we don't do it, then you're going to be hurt. You're going to be punished. That's what we see happening, being shut down and shout down, as you were, right? You're not even allowed to express yourself, to have a different opinion. And it's really interesting that Muslims would say that these are our allies. Is that, you know, seriously, this is what you call an ally? You know, it doesn't look like an ally to me. It looks like you're on their leash. You're on their leash, and you're serving. You're doing their bidding. That you are, you know, just simply fundamentally undermining the faith of many Muslims. You know, we have to wonder, like, why the numbers have increased in terms of Muslims leaving Islam or becoming atheists, whatever that may be, or accepting these type of things. You know, so I just wanted to leave you with any closing comments that you may have, so that we can move about your day and you can go spend some time with your family, inshallah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say that what we have to be concerned with is the creeping undermining of religion and our faith and our ability to hold on to our faith in this very difficult time when it is increasing. Faith is increasingly either being mocked or considered something something that is oppressive or backwards, and where faith is being increasingly even seen as just even just irrelevant, and we see this in many the rise of the nuns, so-called, and so on, and that's going to affect Muslims, you know, and it is affecting the Muslims, you know. So we have to be more concerned with threats to our religion than we are with concern to our physical safety.
Yes,
you know,
right.
Because and furthermore, we also have to understand that the threat to our physical safety is actually more exaggerated of a fear, or it is not just in the empirical reality of the situation. It is not as great of a threat as the threat to our religion.
And also easiest to address, because you know security systems, armed guards, you know, you learn self-defense, you learn how to shoot. I mean, there's ways for you to address, easier to address. I'm sorry, but continue.
Yes, and there are also ways to address through the courts any attempts to try to undermine our ability to practice our religion, as we have the right to a great extent under the law here. So there's that. And then I would also say that it doesn't mean that again, it doesn't mean that we have to be hostile or not work with people who are secular or who have who are on the left or progressive, whatever. We should be willing to cooperate. You know, وتعاونوا على البر والتقوى, cooperating goodness and righteousness and goodness. We need ولا تعاونوا على الإثم والعدوان, and don't cooperate harm and good. And if we just stick with that principle, then we'll be fine. And we have to cultivate good relations with everyone. Now, it is absolutely the case that when it comes to people of the book, that we have fundamentally more in common with them foundationally than we do with someone who is an atheist or who believes that religion is something that you know, something that should not be part of public life. But that doesn't mean that those people we can't cooperate with. And I absolutely, I have had to do a lot of soul searching and self-introspection to see how have I perhaps contributed to contentiousness when I could have kept things more peaceful and using better language. So we need to try to be diplomatic, and that's how the Prophet ﷺ was. He was everyone, and another thing to realize too is that people on the other side and who believe, who have different beliefs and so on, they believe that they're right too. They believe that they're, you know, no one believes that they're foolish and evil. Everyone believes that they're a good person. And so we have to treat them in that way. And perhaps the people who are who believe that we're wrong, through dialogue and through winning over their hearts, they'll realize that we're right, and inshallah, and on this we are certain.
Inshallah.
We're certainly right on that.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair, Brother Ismail. I really appreciated the opportunity. For the viewers, we appreciate you being here. I apologize we're not taking any questions. You know, I'm hoping that many of those questions were answered. Inshallah, moving forward, our hope is to have a regular format like this, and as a matter of fact, to have a regular podcast, which I like to call Muslim Alternatives, a broadcast of Lamppost Education Initiative. Look forward to more of these, and we hope that you will continue to give us your support. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He grants us victory in this life and the hereafter, and He bless all of you and bless all of us. جزاكم الله خيرا وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا وسبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.